I am the first person to conquer Electra, the new intermediate AWS cyber range by Pwned Labs. And in this video, I want to tell you all about it. I'll share with you my experience, some of the things I recommend before you get started, and answer some frequently asked questions about what this cyber range and what this network is. Now, to be clear, this video is not sponsored in any way by Pwned Labs. I just really enjoyed the cyber range, and this is the only time ever in my career that I've gotten first blood on something. So I've never gotten first blood on like Try Hack Me or Hack the Box, but I was able to get first blood on this intermediate AWS red teaming lab, which just feels amazing. So let me go ahead and share with you first an overview. What exactly is Electra? So here we are on their website, and here is what Electra is. We'll just read through this, but I'll explain in a little more detail what to expect. Now, to be clear, I can't do walkthroughs or write-ups. That's not allowed for this lab. So I am limited on what I can share, but I'll share as much as I can. So what exactly is it? Well, it's a fun and immersive intermediate level AWS cyber range. I do want to point out this is intermediate level. If you're brand new to AWS, let me just be realistic. Electra is not for you. You are going to be very stuck, very confused, and very lost. Before diving into Electra, I recommend getting hands-on with AWS. Pwned Labs has some incredible labs that cover AWS. They also have a boot camp or a course that goes through AWS with live training. So I'd recommend beginning there. It may not be the best idea to dive into Electra as your first experience with AWS. It really is intermediate level, but it simulates a realistic company cloud environment, and there are 9 flags to pwn. So the way this is set up when you start the environment is there's 9 different cards. Once you pwn one card, it kind of unlocks the name of the next card. The name is kind of a minor hint that allows you to dive into things. And here is the scenario. Zoom in. Electra is an electric vehicle company that has recently hit the headlines with their new power cell technology. With this increased scrutiny comes increased risk, and you have been engaged by the company to perform a red team engagement starting externally as a threat actor would. Now, this is another thing I want to point out to you. I do AWS pen testing, but generally speaking, when you do an AWS pen test, you don't begin from the outside. It's kind of like doing an internal pen test. For an AWS pen test, generally speaking, the client will give you low-level IAM access to the AWS environment. So you don't need to hunt for creds. You begin with initial access, kind of an assumed breach scenario, because a pen test is time limited and they want you to find as many vulns as possible. This is emulating a red team engagement. A red team engagement is different than a pen test. For a red team engagement, you seek to emulate an APT or an advanced persistent threat, or as some people call them, an advanced persistent teenager, depending on the group you're talking about. But from that vantage point, you're beginning from outside of the environment, outside of the network, and you need to find an initial foothold. And that's what Electra is like. You begin outside of the AWS network. You have to enumerate, you have to dig, you have to use some web app skills and get that initial foothold to even get into the AWS environment. The skills needed, they say familiarity with AWS and Linux command line CLI. I agree with that. Experience with assessing cloud infrastructure. Pwned Labs will definitely help. Yes, like once again, I want to highlight this is intermediate. If you're brand new to AWS, this is not the place that I would start. Instead, I would begin with the walkthrough labs on Pwned Labs and begin with things like CloudGoat, which is something I help maintain by Rhino Security Labs. A basic knowledge of web vulnerabilities. I would say more of an intermediate knowledge. Without giving too much away, you need some pretty decent web app pen testing skills just to get that initial entry point in. So you need more than basic knowledge of web vulnerabilities, at least from my perspective. And then finally, ability to undertake independent research. And this is spot on, but this is true about anything in your career. If you want to get into cyber or pen testing, you need to have the ability to Google stuff, to ask questions to ChatGPT, to look into research, to dig into stuff, to unravel various paths. All of that is important. So with that as an overview, let me just give you an idea of what my experience was like. I'll share with you the good, the things I really enjoyed, the things that could use some improvement, and just maybe some next steps for all of us. So here's what I did. This released on Friday, which would have been, I'm looking at my date, it's the 26th right now while I'm recording. I believe this released on December 20th, which was also the day where I work, we begin our winter break. So we do this really cool thing where I work, where we get like the last week and a half off of every single year. So I haven't had to work for quite a while. And I saw it came out on Friday, which is my last day of work. And I thought, hey, perfect thing to dive into. Let me see how far I can get, but I was not expecting to get first blood. Many of you who know me know this, but I have 2 young kids, so the only time I can even work on stuff like this is late at night after my kids are in bed. So I cannot work on this at all during the day. So I was limited to about the hours of 9 p.m. to about 1 a.m., and that was the only time I could work on it. But I was able to still get first blood. It took me 3 nights, so I worked on it Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night, and that's how long it took me in order to completely conquer this network. So in total, it took me about 10 hours, but I would say budget for anywhere from 15 to 30 hours, depending on your experience. A little background on me is I work for Rhino Security Labs. We're known for AWS pen testing. Like, we're one of the leaders in the field. I help maintain Paku, which is kind of like Metasploit for AWS. And I also help maintain CloudGoat, which is a completely open source platform, or rather project on GitHub that allows you to spin up your own CTF style scenarios in your own AWS account to learn AWS pen testing. So I am not brand new to AWS. I do AWS pen testing as part of my day job, and I help maintain some pretty cool open source stuff around AWS. So I was maybe a little bit quicker than the average person. So I would, once again, guesstimate anywhere from 15 to 30 hours is how long it will take you to fully complete Electra. But I did it. I was able to conquer it. I got first blood. I was the first person to completely finish and conquer this network. Now let's talk about some of the things I really enjoyed about the lab. Number one, it was realistic. Many of the things that I saw as I was going through Electra are things I have seen in the real world. Everywhere from hard-coded creds to different roles to different enumeration. Of course, I can't share too much, but I'll just say this. The things I saw in Electra are things I see all the time in real-world AWS environments. So this is more than a silly CTF platform. This is real-world stuff that you're going to be digging into and real-world misconfigurations that you're going to be exploiting. If you can conquer Electra, you are honestly ready to do at least a basic AWS pen test in the real world. So it was realistic. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The second thing I really enjoyed is it was both difficult, but also straightforward, which is incredibly difficult to do. Now, I've made a few official CTF machines over on TryHackMe, and making a machine is hard. Making a network is even more difficult. This is multiple roles, multiple accounts, multiple users spread across this network. There's a lot of things Pwned Labs and the team had to think through in order to set this up. It was difficult. Some of the attack paths were quite complex, but it was also straightforward. What I mean by that is one attack led pretty logically to the next one. So you weren't lost into a bunch of rabbit holes. You were able to kind of unravel this chain of attacks as you got started. Number 3, it's really a great test of AWS enumeration and exploitation. Like I said before, if you are able to conquer Electra, you have a good baseline. You can honestly say that you are pretty decent at AWS enumeration and exploitation or pen testing, and this would be a good thing to showcase to an employer. Or maybe you're doing an interview and they ask you, hey, how do you stay up to date on cloud attacks? Well, you can walk them through Electra and walk them through some of the attack paths that you found and exploited, and I can tell you, at least speaking for my own org, we would be impressed for you to go through all of that. And then finally, one thing that was really good about it is just the team behind it. I had some feedback that I share with them that I'm also going to share with you. And what I love about Pwned Labs is how receptive they are to feedback. I mean, I've had a few times where I'm going through a lab and I just think, this doesn't make sense. Like, it would make more sense to explain it this way. And I ping the team at Pwned Labs, and like by the very next day, they make a change to the lab or a change to the guide to receive my feedback. So seriously, hats off and kudos to the Pwned Labs team for the incredible network, all of the work you guys are doing, and that you are so willing to receive feedback from the community. Now, let's finally talk about just some areas of improvement or just some frustrations I ran into as I was going through this network. Number one is it's a shared environment. Now, realistically, there's not much you can do about that. The downside of hosting like a red team cloud network is it is expensive. Pwned Labs is spinning this all up in their own environment. Multiple users are attacking it, brute forcing it, and costs add up quick. So there's really no realistic way for Pwned Labs to spin up an individual cloud red team network instance for every individual user, but it is a shared network. And the bad side of being a shared network is sometimes people won't clean up their stuff. So actually, I was talking to a user on Discord before making this video and kind of giving them some sanity checks as they were working through the last flags, and they told me they got a flag without doing something that was required to get the flag. And I was like, hold up. wait, what do you mean? Like, tell me how you did that. And then he told me what he did. And basically a user got the flag, didn't clean up their work, and they were able to grab the flag without doing the work and without learning what the lab was trying to teach. So that's always the downside of a shared lab environment. There's things you can do for self-healing, things you can do for fixing it, which the team at Pwned Labs does. But at the end of the day, a shared lab environment causes some of those things to happen. It's sort of unavoidable when you're in a shared lab environment. The second frustration I had is the EC2s, or the virtual machines that are spun up, that are kind of like the internet-facing servers. There weren't many resources applied to them when I went through the lab. I'm not sure if this changed. I did send this feedback to Pwned Labs. I know a few people have mentioned in the Discord, but one of the major issues is, like, anytime someone is fuzzing one of these web servers, it just sort of tips over. So I know my first net when I was going through this, I was stuck for almost 2 hours because one of the things that you actually need for initial access was down, because somebody was fuzzing it, running Dirbuster or something against it, and I didn't know that. It just showed that it wasn't available, so I assumed it was out of scope or wasn't needed. So I did all this extra enumeration because one of the web servers was down. And I ran into this issue multiple times as I was going through the lab, that some of these web servers don't have that many resources. The EC2s don't have that many resources, and people are hitting them with scanning and brute forcing, and it's causing them to, like, quite literally die for a short period of time before they come back up. One suggestion there would just be very clear to people, hey, do not do brute force attacks. You don't need to do brute force attacks. And that kind of applies to the real world as well. Generally, when you're doing real world pen testing against public facing assets, you're not doing brute forcing attacks because you don't want to bring down a client's actual infrastructure. So one fix to that is either increasing the resources or just being more clear, hey, no brute forcing, none of that craziness is required for this part of the lab, making it very clear to the users. And then finally, the one kind of pain point is I kept finding flags in the wrong order, which isn't terrible, but, like, for example, I would find, let's say, flag 1, and then I would find flag 3, and then I'd go to flag 4, only to realize I didn't find flag 2, and then I'd find flag, like, 7, I didn't find flag 6, and I'd have to go back and retrace my steps. Now, some of this made sense, but some of it didn't. Like, sometimes the flags were in a location that didn't matter. Like, it didn't matter if you found the flag in order to move on to the next step, and that was a little bit of a pain point for me because this is supposed to be a red team engagement. When you do a real red team engagement, you're obviously not finding flags. You see, the way a red team engagement is set up is generally it's a goal execution. So when you sit down with the client and you're planning a red team engagement, you ask the client, hey, what do you want us to try to get? Usually it's not just getting domain admin or AWS admin. Usually it's goal execution. So they might say, hey, I want you to make a fraudulent transaction. Or they might say, hey, I want you to see if you can uncover these secret documents about this product that we are planning. That's your goal to execute. Now, it doesn't matter how you get to that goal. You use all these different kinds of enumeration, but the end goal is you want to get to that goal. So some suggestions for the future is maybe instead of having the flag be your traditional flag.txt, maybe it's a piece of information that you need to get to the goal execution. Maybe it's like, hey, what is the role that you need to do blank? And then that's the flag. And it makes more sense if the end goal is goal execution. The other thing I had the idea of is if we want to do typical flags, maybe if I find flag 1 and I find flag 3, well, it should automatically complete flag 2 because I didn't need flag 2 to go to the next part. That's the beauty of a red team engagement. There's multiple ways to accomplish the same purpose. The end goal is just goal execution, not just collecting flags. But overall, I highly recommend this network, and honestly, it's worth the sub to Pwned Labs alone. To be clear, in order to get access to the cyber ranges, both Thunderdome and Electra, and I believe a GCP one is coming out soon, you do need an annual subscription to Pwned Labs, which is going to be about $200, but it's $200 for the entire year. Which if you've looked into any other cloud training platforms, that is incredibly cheap. I mean, other cloud platforms are charging more than that just for, 30 days or a few months of access. Pwned Labs is incredibly affordable. So if you want to check out Electra, I highly recommend it. If you're brand new to AWS, maybe go through their AWS Labs first, maybe even their AWS course, and then dive into Electra. But hey, let me know if you have any comments, any questions, any suggestions, or anything you want me to explain a little more in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and I will chat with you there.